In my 43 years sitting on this bench, I thought I had witnessed every possible human behavior. I've watched defendants fabricate elaborate stories, perform tears on demand, and deploy every imaginable legal maneuver to escape the consequences of their actions. But never, not once across 4 decades in this robe, had anyone raised a loaded firearm at me inside my own courtroom, until the morning of February 8, 2026, at precisely 9:47 a.m., when Beverly Hills Police Chief Richard Vandermeer walked through those doors and committed the single worst decision of his entire existence. You think you've come across shocking courtroom stories before? I promise you nothing compares to this. Hit that subscribe button right now, because what I'm about to share will fundamentally shift how you view power, authority, and what truly happens when someone convinces themselves they're completely untouchable. This story spread so far and so fast that it was covered internationally across 73 countries. Let me bring you back to where it all began. It started as an ordinary Tuesday morning. My clerk handed me a file that appeared completely routine on the surface. Case number 2026-TR8847, a traffic citation. The defendant, Richard Vandermeer, 52 years old, chief of police for Beverly Hills, one of the wealthiest municipalities in all of Los Angeles County. The complainant, Officer Maria Santos, a 34-year-old LAPD officer and single mother raising 2 young daughters, ages 6 and 8. But Maria Santos was far from an ordinary officer. Before joining the Los Angeles Police Department 7 years prior, she had completed 2 combat tours in Afghanistan serving as military police. She chose night shifts, the dangerous ones, the ones her colleagues avoided, specifically so she could be present for her daughters during the day. Her eldest daughter, Emma, had been battling leukemia for 2 years. Maria was buried under medical debt, picking up overtime whenever possible, and through all of it, she never complained, not one single time. Her fellow officers described her as someone who would hand over her last dollar to a person who needed it more. On January 22, 2026, at approximately 11:34 p.m., Officer Santos was running her standard patrol along Interstate 405 when her radar unit clocked a black Cadillac Escalade traveling 97 miles per hour in a posted 65-mile-per-hour zone. She activated her emergency lights and initiated a stop near the Sunset Boulevard exit. The vehicle didn't respond immediately. It continued for another 1.5 miles before finally pulling onto the shoulder. When Maria approached the driver's window, she immediately recognized the man behind the wheel, Richard Vandermeer. He was dressed in a custom Tom Ford suit that likely cost more than Maria's 2 months of combined salary. On his wrist sat a Patek Philippe timepiece valued at no less than $80,000. The Escalade itself, with its custom upgrades and modifications, carried a price tag well above $95,000. Maria was courteous, professional. She greeted him respectfully and requested his license and registration. That's when things began to deteriorate rapidly. Vandermeer glanced at her badge, looked her directly in the face, and said something I still struggle to repeat here. He informed her that she was a nobody officer from a nobody department and had absolutely no business stopping someone of his standing. He told her to return to her patrol vehicle and act as though this had never occurred. Maria remained composed. She informed him she had recorded his speed at 97 miles per hour and needed to see his documentation. Vandermeer responded with laughter, actual open laughter aimed directly at her face. What came next made my blood run cold when I read it in her written report. He told Maria that her daughter's medical expenses must be mounting considerably, and that it would be a genuine shame if she were to lose her employment and her health coverage over turning nothing into something. Let me be absolutely clear about what just happened. A chief of police used a sick child as leverage to avoid a speeding ticket. Maria's hands trembled, but she wrote the citation regardless. She cited him for excessive speed, failure to yield to an emergency vehicle, and reckless driving. Vandermeer snatched the ticket from her grip, tore it in two right there in front of her, hurled the pieces out his window onto the highway, and drove away without another word. Maria gathered the torn fragments from the road, documented every detail in her official report, and submitted it to her supervisor the following morning. 2 days later, her captain called her into his office. Someone from Beverly Hills had made calls, someone well-connected. There was quiet pressure, but real pressure, to make the citation quietly go away. However, Maria's captain, Captain Robert Chen, was not someone who bent to quiet pressure. 28 years on the force had shaped him into someone with an unshakable backbone. He instructed Maria to pursue the matter through the proper legal channels and pledged his complete support. And that is how Chief Richard Vandermeer found himself standing in my courtroom. When he entered through those doors at 9:45 a.m., 2 minutes before his scheduled appearance, the arrogance radiating off him was almost physical, like heat rising from summer asphalt. He wore yet another expensive suit, this one appearing to be Brioni, conservatively worth $6,000. His shoes, Berluti, added another $2,000 to the picture. Walking beside him was his attorney, a high-profile Beverly Hills lawyer named Gregory Ashford, a man whose entire professional reputation rested on making wealthy clients' problems vanish discreetly. Officer Santos sat in the gallery in her dress uniform. Her decorations were pinned precisely to her chest, her combat action badge, her Army Achievement Medal, her LAPD commendations. Her posture was perfect, hands folded, eyes forward, the portrait of professionalism and dignity. But I could read the exhaustion carved into her face, the particular kind that accumulates from back-to-back shifts and sleepless nights sitting beside a hospital bed, watching your child fight to stay alive. I called the case State versus Richard Vandermeer, case number 2026 TRA 847. Vandermeer's attorney rose. So did Vandermeer, but not in the manner defendants typically stand in my courtroom. He stood as though granting me a favor simply by showing up, as though the entire proceeding existed beneath his dignity. I invited Officer Santos to present her testimony. She stood, approached the witness area, and described everything exactly as it had transpired. Her account was precise, detailed, and completely credible. She provided calibration records for the radar unit, submitted the dash cam footage, and had everything documented without a single gap. When she reached the part describing Vandermeer's threat about her daughter, her voice wavered. Just briefly, just for a moment, before she steadied herself and continued. After 43 years on this bench, I can recognize truth when I hear it. Maria Santos was telling every last word of it. Then it was Vandermeer's opportunity to speak. His attorney attempted to take the lead, but Vandermeer waved him off, literally dismissed his own counsel with a hand gesture, as though swatting away an insect. Then he addressed me directly. What followed was something I will carry with me for the rest of my career. He claimed the radar equipment must have been faulty. He insisted he was traveling only marginally above the posted limit and suggested that Officer Santos had likely misread the device because she was distracted by personal matters. He delivered all of this with a smirk, a visible, deliberate smirk, while a mother sat across the room thinking about her daughter's cancer treatments. But then something shifted. Are you still with me? Drop a comment right now and tell me what would you have done sitting in my position? Would you have maintained your composure? Would you have thrown every applicable law directly at him? Tell me in the comments, because what comes next will challenge everything you believe about staying calm under the most extreme pressure. I posed a straightforward question to Vandermeer. I asked him directly whether he had threatened Officer Santos regarding her continued employment and her daughter's health insurance coverage. He didn't pause for even a second. He acknowledged that he may have indicated that making unfounded accusations against a police chief could carry professional consequences for her career. He said it as casually as someone commenting on the weather, as though threatening a mother over her child's medical care was perfectly standard procedure. His attorney's complexion shifted to something resembling chalk. Even this expensive Beverly Hills attorney understood his client had just confessed to witness intimidation on the record in open court. But Vandermeer wasn't finished. He continued, stating that Officer Santos ought to be more selective about who she chooses to pull over, and that certain people in law enforcement have matters of significantly greater importance than minor traffic encounters. I felt my jaw tighten. I have been on this bench for more than 4 decades. My father held the same position before me. He instilled in me from an early age that every person, without exception, stands equal before the law. Whether you arrive in a rusted Honda or a customized Escalade, whether you hold a mop or a badge with a chief's star. In my courtroom, one standard applies to everyone, but I kept my composure. I requested that the court display the dash cam footage Officer Santos had submitted. It played on the courtroom screen, and I will tell you plainly, that footage was more damning than even the written report had conveyed. Every word was audible. His condescending tone, the explicit threats, his reaction when he destroyed that citation. You could see Maria's hands shaking while she worked to maintain her professionalism as this man mocked her and weaponized her daughter's illness against her, When the footage concluded, the courtroom sat in total silence. Even Vandermeer's attorney appeared visibly shaken. Vandermeer himself sat there projecting boredom, periodically checking his phone beneath the table as though he had somewhere more important to be. I asked whether he had anything further to add. He rose again, and this time his manner had shifted. The condescension had given way to something harder. He announced that he had spent 27 years in law enforcement, that he oversaw a department serving one of California's most affluent communities, that he maintained a personal relationship with the governor, regularly played golf with 2 sitting state senators, and dined with the mayor of Los Angeles twice annually. Then he looked directly at me and crossed a line I hadn't known was possible to cross in my courtroom. He said I was a traffic court judge who spent my career managing minor inconveniences, and that I ought to be realistic about who exactly I was dealing with. He said, and I remember these words precisely, that people at his level do not answer to people at my level. The room went completely still. I watched Officer Santos close her eyes slowly as though she couldn't process what she was hearing. My bailiffs, officers I've worked alongside for years, tensed visibly. Everyone present understood that something was about to happen. Nobody yet knew what. I drew a breath. I looked at this man, this police chief who had built his entire identity around the belief that he was untouchable, and I began to speak. I told him that in this courtroom there are no levels. I told him that the badge he carries is supposed to represent something real: service, protection, integrity, not threats directed at single mothers, not leveraging a title to intimidate people who are simply doing their jobs. And then, as though some higher force had decided to author the most dramatic possible conclusion, something none of us anticipated occurred. My clerk received an urgent communication and approached the bench with a folded note. I read it once. Then I read it a second time to confirm I had understood it correctly. The FBI had been conducting an active investigation into Chief Vandermeer for the preceding 8 months. Case number FBI 2026, CR 3342. The investigation covered allegations of corruption, evidence tampering, and systematic abuse of authority, based on multiple complaints originating from officers within his own department. Federal investigators had been methodically building their case and had planned to move toward arrest within the following 2 weeks. But here was the critical detail. Accompanying that message was an urgent addendum. FBI agents were already en route to my courtroom. They had been monitoring developments, and based on the statements Vandermeer had made on the record today, combined with his documented threatening behavior toward Officer Santos, they had made the decision to accelerate their timeline. The arrest warrant was being executed immediately. In 43 years on this bench, I had never been in this position. A federal arrest warrant executing in real time inside my own courtroom. But I have never been someone who lets a teachable moment slip past unused. If you're still watching, you're about to witness something that millions of people have now seen. This is the moment that spread worldwide. But before we arrive there, and if you believe that no one, regardless of their title or wealth or connections, sits above the law, hit that like button right now. Let's show everyone watching that real accountability matters. I informed Vandermeer that before issuing my ruling on the traffic matters, certain additional information had come before the court. He registered what appeared to be mild irritation, the expression of someone whose time is being unnecessarily consumed. His attorney, by contrast, had developed the look of someone who senses catastrophe approaching but cannot yet identify from which direction. I explained that the court had received information pertaining to pending federal charges and that FBI agents were currently in transit and would arrive momentarily. The transformation in Vandermeer's face was immediate. The practiced arrogance dissolved, replaced in rapid succession by confusion, then fear, then something raw and desperate. He rose so abruptly that his chair scraped loudly across the floor. He began shouting, actually shouting inside my courtroom, calling it a setup, a coordinated attack, insisting I had no authority to hold him for federal agents. His attorney grabbed his arm and attempted to pull him back into his seat. Vandermeer shoved him aside. He began moving toward the exit, announcing he was leaving and threatening the badges of anyone who attempted to interfere. My head bailiff, Officer Marcus Thompson, a former Marine with 15 years of distinguished service, planted himself in front of that door. He is a large man, 6 feet 4 inches, and he blocked the exit with his full frame. He told Vandermeer, calmly and without any trace of aggression, that he was required to remain inside the courtroom. That is when Richard Vandermeer made the choice that obliterated his life entirely. He reached inside his jacket. He withdrew his service weapon, a Glock 19, and he aimed it directly at me, seated on the bench, a loaded firearm, pointed at a judge in a courtroom filled with people. Time altered itself. Everything moved at a different speed. I heard someone in the gallery scream. I watched Officer Santos leap to her feet. I saw my bailiffs respond without hesitation, drawing their own weapons. Officer Thompson had his firearm aimed at Vandermeer within 2 seconds, but I didn't move. I sat exactly where I was, on that bench, looking directly down the barrel of that gun, and I did not flinch. My heart was striking my chest so forcefully I could hear it, but my hands didn't tremble, my voice didn't break. I held Vandermeer's gaze and I said a single word: don't. For approximately 5 seconds, perhaps fewer, perhaps slightly more because time had stopped behaving normally, Vandermeer stood there, his arm extended, his hand shaking, his face flushed crimson with something between rage and panic. My bailiffs had him surrounded, weapons drawn, a chorus of commands filling the air. Drop the weapon, put it down now, get on the ground. And then it was as though his will simply gave out. His arm fell. The firearm slipped from his grip and struck the floor with a sound I will never forget. Officer Thompson moved with a speed I have genuinely never witnessed before or since. Vandermeer was face down, hands restrained behind his back, in less than 10 seconds. I counted from the moment that weapon hit the floor to the moment those handcuffs engaged. 9 seconds. 45 seconds total. That is the full elapsed time from the moment Richard Vandermeer drew that weapon to the moment he was under arrest. 45 seconds that felt like 45 years. 45 seconds that ended a career, dismantled a reputation, and established without any remaining ambiguity that no one is beyond the reach of accountability. The courtroom collapsed into chaos. People were weeping. Others were shouting. Everyone was attempting to process what they had just witnessed in person. Officer Santos had one hand pressed to her mouth, tears moving freely down her face. My clerk was already on the phone coordinating emergency response. My bailiffs held Vandermeer against the floor while they awaited backup, and I sat there, hands pressed flat against the surface of my desk, focusing on maintaining steady, measured breathing. I have faced threats before in this career. Defendants have screamed at me, directed profanity at me, made promises about finding me outside these walls, but I had never had a weapon aimed at my face, never experienced that specific combination, terror and fury, and a determined refusal to let any of it show. Within 3 minutes, FBI agents entered through the courtroom doors. Special Agent Patricia Moreno, the lead investigator on the Vandermeer case, assessed the scene in a single sweep and immediately assumed command. Vandermeer was formally advised of his rights in connection with the federal charges already pending against him. Officer Thompson then enumerated the new charges: assault with a deadly weapon upon a judicial officer, brandishing a firearm within a courthouse, attempted intimidation of a judicial officer. The list continued expanding. After the federal agents removed Vandermeer, I called a 15-minute recess. I needed a moment. I walked to my chambers, sat down at my desk, and simply breathed. My hands were shaking now, the delayed reaction as adrenaline receded and reality settled fully into place. Someone had pointed a loaded weapon at me in my own courtroom, the space that is supposed to embody safety and order and the promise of justice. My clerk brought water. Officer Thompson looked in to check on me. Officer Santos stood outside my chamber door, and when I invited her inside, she broke down completely. She apologized through her tears, saying this was entirely her fault, that if she had simply let the citation go, none of this would have occurred. I stopped her immediately. I told her clearly and without qualification that none of this was her responsibility, not a single element of it. She performed her duties. She did so correctly, professionally, and with remarkable courage. She stood her ground against someone who had built an entire career around watching people back down. She refused to sacrifice her integrity even when the cost threatened to be everything she had. She was precisely the kind of officer every community deserves. What happened next may genuinely surprise you. It is, in many respects, the most significant part of this entire story. But before I share it, I'm asking you to do something. Share this video. Send it to someone who needs to encounter this story. Post it where others can find it. Let people understand that justice remains achievable, that genuine courage still carries weight, that standing up to those who abuse power is worth every risk, even when it's frightening. Share it right now. After collecting myself, I returned to the bench. News cameras had already gathered outside the building. Word had traveled quickly, but I had matters remaining before the court that required my attention. I called Officer Santos back to the stand. I entered a finding of guilty on every traffic charge brought against Richard Vandermeer: excessive speed, failure to yield to an emergency vehicle, reckless driving, and added a charge of willful destruction of a traffic citation, which I had witnessed personally on the dash cam recording. But beyond the legal rulings, I wanted something entered into the permanent record. I wanted everyone present and everyone who would ever encounter this case to understand something foundational about what justice requires. I stated that Officer Maria Santos represented everything honorable about law enforcement. She served her country in a combat zone. She served her community without complaint. She worked punishing hours to sustain her family while her daughter fought for her life. And when confronted with corruption and deliberate intimidation from someone holding far greater institutional power, she didn't yield. She chose correctly, even when that choice threatened to cost her everything. I stated that Richard Vandermeer represented everything destructive about the misuse of authority. He weaponized his position not to serve, but to dominate. He used his badge not to protect, but to threaten. He had convinced himself that his title granted him special standing, that his network of powerful relationships made him immune, that his financial resources elevated him above the rules that bind everyone else. And I stated that what had taken place in this courtroom today confirmed something I have believed across my entire career. In the eyes of justice, there is no such thing as a special category of person. There are no untouchables, no sum of money, no political relationship, no title or rank places any individual above accountability. The federal charges against Vandermeer were comprehensive: corruption, racketeering, evidence tampering, witness intimidation, abuse of authority, and now assault upon a judicial officer with a deadly weapon. By the time the full count was assembled, he faced 37 separate federal charges in addition to the state convictions I had entered. His trial followed 6 months later. I monitored it closely. The evidence was insurmountable. Officers from within his own department testified against him. Business owners described in specific terms the protection payments they had made. Financial analysts mapped the money trail with precision. And of course, there was the courtroom recording and a police chief drawing his weapon and aiming it at a sitting judge, captured from multiple angles on multiple cameras. The jury deliberated for under 4 hours before returning a unanimous verdict: guilty on every count. The federal judge presiding over his case, Judge Patricia Morrison, sentenced Richard Vandermeer to 18 years in federal prison. 18 years. He will be 70 years old before he becomes eligible to seek parole. His pension was permanently revoked. His law enforcement certification was stripped and cannot be restored. He lost everything. And Officer Maria Santos? She received a formal commendation for valor from the Los Angeles Police Department. The FBI recognized her with a civilian citation for her cooperation throughout the investigation. 6 months after the trial concluded, she was promoted to the rank of sergeant. The police union, working alongside several community organizations, raised more than $200,000 to assist with her daughter Emma's ongoing medical expenses. Emma is doing better. Last I heard, she's been in remission for 8 months. She's back in school. She plays soccer. She gets to simply be a child. And her mother comes home after every shift knowing she made the right choice, that she didn't allow someone with power and money and connections to simply rewrite reality and walk away unpunished. I return to that morning often in my thoughts. I think about those 45 seconds when everything existed on a knife's edge. I think about what could easily have gone differently. That weapon could have discharged. People could have been gravely hurt. The situation could have escalated into something genuinely catastrophic. But I also reflect on what went exactly right. A committed officer did her job in spite of direct threats against her livelihood and her child. A court process supported her. Federal investigators performed thorough, patient, methodical work. And when a powerful man attempted to use violence as an escape from accountability, every system around him responded precisely as it was designed to. Here is what 43 years on this bench has taught me. Justice is not automatic. It doesn't materialize simply because courts exist, or laws exist, or judges wear robes. Justice occurs because people actively choose to create it. People like Officer Santos, who refused to be broken by intimidation. People like the officers who testified against their own chief at significant personal risk. People like the federal agents who spent 8 months constructing a case built to withstand any challenge. People like my bailiffs who place their bodies between danger and the people they protect. Justice is a choice, every day, in every situation. We choose whether to stand for what is right or to look away because standing is harder. We choose whether to hold people accountable regardless of their resources and connections, or to extend to them exemptions that we would never extend to anyone else. Here is what I want everyone watching to take with them. You may never be a judge, a federal agent, or a law enforcement officer. You may never find yourself at the center of a courtroom confrontation that makes international news, but you will encounter moments in your life, in your community, in your workplace, where the choice between what is easy and what is right sits directly in front of you. You will encounter people who have convinced themselves that their status protects them from consequences. You will witness injustice and have to decide whether to speak or to stay silent. In those moments, think of Officer Maria Santos. Remember that she was exhausted, frightened, financially stretched to her limits, and facing explicit threats aimed at her sick daughter. And she made the right choice anyway. She did not yield. She did not negotiate her integrity. She held her position. That is the real lesson here, not the dramatic arrest footage, not the satisfying finality of a verdict or a sentencing. The lesson is that ordinary people possess extraordinary power when they refuse to accept the premise that some individuals exist beyond the rules that govern everyone else.